What happens when a woman who has spent her entire life saving her family suddenly discovers that everyone she has protected has gathered without her? She simply walked into the barn and saw something that changed everything. None of them will ever forget what happened next. Lentils were bubbling in a pot, and the smell of bay leaves wafted gently through the kitchen, as if begging, well, someone, anyone, notice me. Sophia stood at the stove in a worn sweater with stretched sleeves, barefoot on the floor, which still hadn't been cleaned after the last leak. She stirred the soup slowly, as if the rhythm of the day, the breath of the house, depended on it. Behind her, as always, there was silence. No, thank you. No, how are you? No, did you remember everything today? Just silence, thick as old jam, seemingly sweet, but making her teeth ache. Matteo, her nephew, sat at the table, picking at a crust of bread. A teenager with perpetually slumped shoulders and headphones, even when he wasn't wearing them. He wasn't bad, he just was. Like a chair, like a shelf, like a backdrop. It's a fast day, Sophia said, pouring him some soup. Uh-huh, he grunted without looking up. The clatter of a spoon against porcelain, a wisp of steam, and not a word. That was all the gratitude she got from the woman who had carried them all on her back for 10 years, while the rest pretended the calendar didn't exist. Their mother died, and they all scattered like cockroaches after the lights came on, and she was left behind. And she was left with debts, banks, schools, broken window handles, and with Matteo, the very same child who had been promised that someone would come back for him. They never came back. Sophia took off her apron and hung it up, like you hang up your tiredness, on a hook that was already too full. She turned to say something, but Matteo had already gone to his room without even finishing his dinner. Her gaze remained fixed on the emptiness, like a thread torn from a needle. Well, at least he didn't throw his plate, she thought, and sat down by the window, wrapping her hands around her mug. Outside, the evening was beginning, blue and sticky. A red dog was rummaging through a bag on the street, most likely thrown out by her neighbor Clara, the one who likes to say, "Poor Sophia, all alone." There was a photograph on the windowsill, black and white. Little Matteo, just a baby in her arms, younger, with hope in his eyes that had long since been wiped away like dust with a rag. And next to him was the boy's father. His smile was as tight as a spring. This dad now lives in another city, with a new wife and children. It was as if he had consigned his old family to the archives. There was a sharp knock at the door. Sophia flinched, as if from within. She approached, wiping her hands on her sweater. She opened the door. Thomas was standing in the doorway, her older brother. His gaze was dry, his coat spotless, and he smelled of a good life. The man who called once a year to remind her that things weren't easy for him either. She didn't immediately understand why he had come. He never came just like that. "Are you home?" he asked, as if expecting her to answer. "No, I'm in Paris." "You can see for yourself," she exhaled. "Come in." He didn't come in. He remained on the threshold, as if afraid of getting his shoes dirty with someone else's life. "Is Matteo home?" "In his room. Is something wrong?" "We need to talk. In the barn." Sophia frowned. In the barn? Everything is there. She felt the air slowly tighten in her chest. It was as if her ribs remembered something they had long wanted to forget. "Everything?" He nodded, calmly, even a little guiltily. Better now. Sophia silently took a step back, as if she wanted to slam the door shut, but couldn't. She understood. If she left, it would hurt. If she didn't, everything would stay the same. And that was worse. We've only just begun this story. But what happens in the barn will turn everything upside down. You won't want to miss how it unfolds, and who ends up where they never should have been. You've always been too soft, Sophia, he said, looking past her, not at her. That's why you've been trampled on your whole life. The phrase sounded like a reproach and a sentence. Thomas didn't say it with malice, not even with pity. He simply stated a fact. As if he had said, the sky is blue, the grass is green, you are weak. They stood at the gate, and between them lay the years that had passed. Thomas coughed and looked away, as if frightened by his own directness. Sophia said nothing. She just looked down at her hands, the same hands that washed their dishes, mended their shirts, carried bags of groceries. Hands that never hit, never pushed, never pointed. They just did. And did. And did. Soft? Yes, you are. Software. But who was tough then? You, when you abandoned us that spring? When Mom was lying there and no one cared how I was coping on my own? The words didn't come out. They stayed inside, as they always did. She just nodded and followed her brother like someone who had been ordered to do so. Her legs moved, but her soul turned back. On the way to the barn, she felt the cold seeping through her sleeves. The wind blew dry leaves across the yard, and every rustle reminded her that people had once laughed here. Long ago, before the family became a set of rules and resentments. Thomas walked ahead, straight and focused. He probably thought he was doing the right thing. Or maybe he just wanted to get the formalities over with. A rusty watering can hung on the old fence. Sophia remembered how her father had yelled at her for leaving it out in the sun. She remembered how he had been silent at dinner that night, then pushed his plate away and said to her mother, "She's weak. She's not a woman. She's jelly." Those words stuck in her skin like a splinter, and every time someone told her to be strong, she heard, "You're not good enough." And every time someone said, "Be kind," she heard, "Now turn the other cheek." And every time she was silent, they called it wisdom, and then reproached her for inaction. "Thomas," she said when they reached the barn, "what's going on?" He turned, and his gaze became heavy, like water frozen in a bucket. "You'll see. Just be ready." Ready for what? The truth, Sophia, or at least how others see it. She laughed, silently, with a cough. Others? These others are your own people. Your own people who haven't called in years, who haven't come to visit, who haven't asked how I am. Your own people who cut me out of family photos. Thomas looked away. As always, she ran her fingers along the boards of the barn, dry, rough, just like inside. "And you're taking me to them. Why? Because we have to. We have to." There was always more coldness than meaning in those words. That's what they said when they hid her mother's body in a closed coffin. That's what they said when Matteo wasn't asked who he wanted to live with. That's what they said when Sophia called the hospital and was told, "There are no more relatives on the list." She took a step back. "What if I don't go in?" He was silent. "If I turn around now, you'll say I ruined everything, that I'm acting like a spoiled child again, like a little girl, like the one who's too soft, right?" He didn't answer, but his eyes said yes. Sophia took a slow breath, and she realized they didn't want to hear her story. They wanted to tell theirs and rewrite hers, as if her softness wasn't a trait, but a mistake, as if being kind was a crime. But what if he was right? What if it was her kindness that allowed others to become cruel? She stood at the barn door, her fingers trembling, not from the cold, from exhaustion, from self-loathing, from hatred for them, from the fact that she was still, despite everything. waiting for someone to say, "You were needed." This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. The next scene in the barn won't just turn the family upside down. It will tear down the facade. Stay. It will hurt, but truly. The barn door creaked, as if it were breathing with her. Sophia took a step inside, and the first thing she felt was not a gaze, not air, but warmth. Not cozy, but stifling. Heavy, like in a room where everyone had been silent for a long time. Right behind her was Tomas, no longer her brother, but just a shadow following her. Inside, it smelled of old apples, gasoline, and dust, the kind of smells that soak into wood and stay there forever, even if you take everything out. A lamp hung from the ceiling, old, tied up with wire. It gave off a dim light. It made their faces look unfamiliar. There were 7 of them. A family. Those who had once been part of everyday life now stood at a distance, as if waiting for a judge, not knowing who would be accused. On a stool sat Clara, her sister. She had a new haircut, rings on her fingers, and the look of someone who always has things to do. Next to her was Uncle Hugo, with his perpetually red nose and a sad shadow on his forehead, as if he himself were surprised that he was still alive. Cousin Raphael is the one who never called, but was in the know. His wife Elena, whom Sophia barely knew, always looked at her with an expression that said, "You should put some lipstick on, dear." Matteo stood in the corner, leaning against a wooden beam with his hands in his pockets. His gaze was shifting, as if he wasn't quite there. He didn't look at her, and that hurt more than any words could have. Sophia slowly walked across the barn. Each step echoed, like an echo from the past. "Sit down," someone said. She couldn't make out who. "Thanks, I'll stand." Her voice sounded even, almost polite, like a waitress who had been insulted in the kitchen, but the customer shouldn't notice. Clara stood up. She moved closer. "Listen, don't think it's behind your back. It's just that we—" "All adults," Sophia interrupted, "and decided that I'm not part of it anymore. Right?" Clara pursed her lips. "Not exactly. We wanted to talk. 10 years ago, we could talk. When Mom was dying. When Matteo couldn't sleep at night and woke up crying. When I took a second job because there was nothing to eat in the house. Back then, no one wanted to talk. No one interrupted. Not even Hugo, who usually made inappropriate jokes. And now you're all here in the barn, like at a meeting. And I'm wondering why?" Elena smoothed her hair. "We didn't know how to involve you. It was complicated. And now, it's just important that you hear us. I hear you. Okay, but let's be honest. Who decided that I should stand here like this, and you stand there like that?" Silence. Even the lamp on the ceiling seemed to stop swinging. Thomas finally exhaled. "We want things to be different." "It's too late," she replied. "Everything is already different. You just didn't notice when it happened." There was no reproach in that sentence, only fatigue, the kind that sits in your lower back, your knees, your voice. Sophia turned away toward the wall, where her father's saddle once hung, where she hid as a child when her mother screamed again, where she once said to herself, "I'll never cry in front of them again." Matteo moved closer, timidly, but not for a hug, for words. He said, "I didn't know they were preparing all this. I just said you weren't celebrating anything." "Because there was no reason to," she replied. "Because I don't see the point in candles and balloons anymore. Because when you live without your loved ones, every day is like a breath." She turned to everyone. I was soft, yes, Maybe I still am. But it's not out of weakness. It's out of what you call stupidity. I call it love. Only your love seems to work on a schedule and with a filter. Raphael fidgeted. Listen, we're not enemies. No, you're just family, she smiled. And that's much worse. She walked out the door. She didn't slam it. She just closed it. And she remained outside, under a gray sky that offered no rain but promised no sun either. She stood on the street, against the wooden wall of a barn, as if her back were against the very past that had caught up with her again without warning. Her palms slid across the rough board, leaving a splinter under her fingernail. But Sophia didn't even flinch. Her pain was no longer external. Her pain was cultivated, polite, well-trained to remain silent. Footsteps behind her. Thomas was in no hurry. He approached, stopped, without touching her. You want to know why we called you here, don't you? She didn't answer. He paused a little longer and handed her a thin envelope. This came for you. To your old address. Clara found out by accident. We thought, well, you should see it. Sophia took the envelope, not right away. The edge was torn, like an old box. Her fingers clenched it as if it might bite her. She didn't open it right away. She was afraid. Really afraid. Not because the letter was dangerous, but because it might contain something she would have to bear alone again. She slowly sat down on a step. Thomas remained standing, as if he were still deciding whether to be a brother or an executor. Sophia tore open the envelope. She took out the folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was male, familiar to the point of disgust. Clear, even, without a hint of emotion. She read the first line, and something tightened in her chest. It felt like steel nails had been driven into her ribs. Dear Sophia. The text continued, simple, unpretentious. No, I'm sorry, or it's my fault. Only facts. Only a request. Only her. As the last hope for a man who once left without looking back. It was a letter from Matteo's father, the same man who promised to return, but never did. The man who gave his son to a relative and then disappeared as if the boy were a suitcase. The one who hadn't written a single line in 10 years. And now, he was writing. Not out of love, not out of remorse. Out of necessity, brazenly, directly, like a man. I have a request for you, not for myself, for him. Matteo needs to know. I don't want all this to die with me. He's an adult now. He has a right to know, and you have the right to tell him. Something stirred inside her. She felt an old wave rising in her chest, the one that had died down every time Matteo asked, "Does Dad really remember me?" And she would answer, "Of course he does," even though she already knew he didn't, or pretended not to, or just didn't want to. Sophia began, but her voice broke. Yes, Thomas said quietly. He's dying. And he wrote to everyone. Only you replied. I didn't reply, she exhaled. I was silent. As always, and that was also an answer. He asks you to bring Matteo, to tell him. That's all. Sophia stood up. The wooden step creaked under her foot in protest. You don't understand. He didn't write for his son. He wrote for himself, so he could die without guilt. To shift the burden onto me. Maybe so. But Matteo isn't you. He needs to know. She turned around, and her eyes were like the eyes of someone who had been staring into the darkness for too long, and who told him he had to. You? Them? Him? Thomas didn't answer. He just took a thin wallet out of his pocket, opened it, and handed her a photograph. It was a boy. Funny, curly-haired. Matteo. Small. In his hands was the same toy she had thrown away just this summer, a toy that no one recognized, just like her. And on the back was written, "In case I ever need you." Sophia took the photo. Her hands were not trembling. They were like stone. She knew that there would be no turning back from this letter. It was a door. Once she stepped through it, all the lies would collapse. Sophia sat in her kitchen. She didn't eat, drink, or cry. She just sat there. Her elbows were on the table, her hands clasped together, as if in prayer. But there was no prayer. The letter lay next to her, and the photograph was between her palms. Little Matteo looked up from the yellowed picture, and there was something unbearable in his gaze. Trust. "You've always been too soft." The words echoed in her head again. Tomas's voice was firm, confident, as if he knew what it meant to be right. Sophia stood up. She walked around the kitchen. She walked around twice and sat down again. What if I tell him? Just go to him, sit down, and say, "Here's the letter. Here it is. Here are his fears, his pity, his desire to be forgiven. But what about me? Who will forgive me if it destroys Matteo completely?" She remembered how he used to cry as a child, always silently, always into his pillow. And then he would say, "I understand everything. Dad is working. Dad is far away. The main thing is that you're here." And she was. Everywhere. At school, at the doctor's, at parent-teacher conferences, at exams, at graduations, at his bedside in the hospital. She was there in his childhood, where his father was absent with such zeal, as if he had cut himself out of the family album with a knife. And now, come and tell him. Why? So that the one who left could be forgiven? So that the boy who had been deceived could learn that he had been used twice? She remembered one evening. Matteo was little. They were sitting in the dark. The lights had been turned off. He said, "If Dad came now, would you let him in?" She laughed then, bitterly. "I would let him in, but first I'd make him sit there while you eat, do the laundry, and grow up while I sleep. And then, maybe." Matteo fell asleep, and she cried, because she knew. He had already made his choice. He had chosen her. Only no one had asked her if she wanted to be chosen by default. There was a knock at the door, hesitant. She went over. "Matteo." "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking." "Everyone says you're angry." "I'm not angry. Everything inside me is messed up." He came in. He didn't take off his sneakers. He sat down on the edge of the chair, like a stranger. "Did you find out something?" She nodded. "A letter. From your father." "Oh, I see." He looked away. "Well, let him say what he wants. It's not that simple. He wants you to know everything. Well, let him tell you." She looked at him and saw not a boy, but a man who had learned not to wait. "Do you want to?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Probably. Although, honestly, I'm afraid it will be worse than nothing." Sophia felt a tightness in her chest. Words rose to her throat, but did not come out. It seemed to her that any decision would be a mistake. If she spoke, she would betray herself. If she didn't, she would betray him. Matteo stood up. "But if you say you want me to, I'll go." He left, leaving behind the smell of the street, dust, and something unsaid. She sat down at the table again. She looked at the letter, then at the photo, and whispered, "I don't know what's right. I just don't want to be alone again if everything falls apart." The house was especially quiet that morning. No clattering of dishes, no banging of cupboards, not even footsteps in the hallway. Sophia got up early, not because she couldn't sleep, but because the decision she had made the night before wouldn't let her rest. It burned in her chest, as if she had swallowed a piece of coal and couldn't spit it out. She made some strong tea. She poured it into a thick ceramic mug, the one Matteo had broken as a child, and then glued back together. Since then, it had always leaked through the crack. But Sophia hadn't thrown it away. She said, "If it holds, it's alive." There was an envelope on the table. Again. She already knew every letter, every curve of the handwriting, every false note between the lines. But today, it wasn't just a letter. It had become a point, or a beginning. Matteo entered the kitchen barefoot, wearing the stretched t-shirt he wore as a child. He didn't even have time to say good morning before he saw the keys in her hand. "Where are you going?" he asked. "On a trip." She handed him the letter. "You can come with me if you want. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But I'm leaving." He took the envelope, hesitated, and put it in his pocket. He didn't read it. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "But it's not the right time for us anyway. We always do everything too late. It's time to try doing something untimely." The car was empty. No radio, no conversation, just the road. Matteo looked out the window. Sophia stared at a spot in front of her, as if she would turn the wrong way if she looked away. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the steering wheel, as if the outcome depended on it. "What if he doesn't want to again?" Matteo asked. "Then we'll know we did everything we could. What if he lied? Then it'll be on his conscience, not ours." He fell silent. Then he added quietly, "You shouldn't have done it alone. Back then. All your life." Sophia glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. He wasn't joking. He was looking ahead, like an adult who had seen his father's shadow in the mirror and realized he could become just like him. They pulled up to the house, small, shabby, with a peeling gate. Sophia turned off the engine. Her stomach felt cold. Her head was empty. Matteo got out first, without a word. She followed, step by step, as if in a fog. A thin man in a bathrobe with an oxygen tube in his nose opened the door. He didn't immediately recognize who was standing in front of him. Then he did. "Sophia. Matteo. You came?" She nodded. "We're here." He took a step back, letting them in. No joy, no apologies, only exhaustion. In his eyes, his face, his hands, which trembled from the time that waits for no one. And at that moment, Sophia knew there was no going back. No what ifs. No, can I ask again? It had all begun. He appeared unexpectedly, like everything important. Small, clumsy, about 7 years old, with a watering can in his hands and dirty knees. While Sophia and Matteo stood at the door, he ran out from behind the house, shouting, "Grandpa, I spilled everything. I forgot the rose. It's prickly." Sophia flinched at the word, Grandpa. It sounded in the silence like a spoon in an empty plate, loud and insolent. The boy noticed her, stopped, and squinted. "Who are you?" he asked bluntly, as only children who don't know how to pretend can. "We're—" Sophia began, but Matteo interrupted her. "I'm his son. And she's Sophia." The boy thought for a moment. Then he shrugged and said, "Come on in." He's in a good mood today. He's hardly grumbling at all. And he ran into the house. Sophia remained on the porch, breathing heavily. It was as if she had been pushed and hadn't had time to put her hands out. "He already has a grandson," she said quietly. Matteo didn't answer. He just followed the boy, as if he knew the way to a place Matteo himself didn't dare enter. Sophia stayed outside. Suddenly, she felt someone standing next to her. She turned around and saw a woman in her 40s wearing an apron, her hands covered in flour. "I'm Lucia. I'm his current wife's sister." She spoke calmly. "I came to help out for a while. You can see for yourself." I didn't think anyone was here." Lucia nodded. "Yes, he doesn't like to talk about the past, especially if it doesn't fit in with the new walls." Sophia sat down on a bench. Lucia sat down next to her. Neither of them was in a hurry to ask questions. "Is that your boy?" Sophia asked, nodding in the direction where Matteo had disappeared. "No, he's the neighbor's. But he's here every day. He walks around, chats. The old man has softened up with him. He used to be like a rock." They fell silent. "What were you to him?" Lucia asked. Sophia wanted to answer. "I was nobody." But she said, "I'm the one who held everything together while he was gone, and the one who came when no one else knew what to do." Lucia looked at her intently. "Then you're not who you were. You're the one who stayed. And that's not weakness." Sophia suddenly felt like she could breathe. Not completely, but her breath was deeper. "I don't know why I'm here. Honestly, it's like it's from Matteo. And it's like it's to tell myself, that's it. Enough." Lucia smiled. They often coincide. Sometimes you have to do something important for others in order to find yourself. She stood up and shook out her apron. "Let's go. I'll make some tea. I don't know what you want from him. But I know for sure what you don't need, to wait for him to change. Just take what's yours and go." Sophia nodded, and suddenly she realized this was the first adult in many years who hadn't tried to judge her, blame her, or change her. He just saw her. On the second day, Sophia was in no hurry to leave. She didn't know why she stayed. She felt no promises, no obligations, no guilt. She just stayed. It was as if the world had paused for a moment, and she had been given a rare opportunity to look at everything not as a participant, but as an observer. It was as if someone had left someone else's life on the windowsill, and for the first time, she could touch it with her hands without fear of being punished for her curiosity. The house was old, but full of life. Where her own kitchen smelled of loneliness and undercooked soup, this place smelled of bread, wet rags, and medicine. It was uncomfortable, but honest. Lucia bustled about, fluffing pillows, scolding the boy, laughing out loud, and suddenly it became clear. People can live like this. Without lies. Without tension. Just being. Matteo sat with the boy in the yard, showing him how to tie knots in a rope. Sophia watched from the window. He smiled, genuinely, not as usual, politely and tiredly. This boy, the neighbor's son, funny, with protruding ears and perpetually skinned knees, became something like a mirror. Matteo didn't hide from him. He talked to him as an equal. "Do you know he has a son?" Sophia asked suddenly. Lucia put the kettle on. "I know. But he doesn't talk to his son. That's a different story. Also an old one." "Did he abandon everyone?" Lucia shrugged. "Or lost them, or pretended it was easier that way. It's often convenient for men not to understand. They call it moving on." Sophia walked down the corridor and opened the door to the room. He was lying there, the same man, the one whose silence she remembered better than his voice from her childhood. Withered, breathing heavily, his eyes pressed into the pillow. He was asleep, or pretending to be. It didn't matter. There were medicines on the bedside table, next to an old book with a cover that looked like it had been scratched with fingernails. Inside was a bookmark with a photo of little Matteo. The smile in the picture was one he hadn't smiled in a long time. Sophia took the photo. She didn't steal it. She simply took back a piece of herself that had once been taken from her without asking. She put it in her pocket and left. "How are you?" Lucia asked. I don't know. I feel lighter, but it's like after a heavy rain. You're still wet, but you're not soaked anymore. They drank tea. With milk, like when they were children. Sophia caught herself not expecting to be interrupted for the first time in a long time, or accused. In the evening, Matteo came over and sat down next to her. He asked if I could stay until morning. Do you want to? I want to understand. Just understand what I'm feeling. Do you? Sophia nodded. I'm staying until I understand why I came here in the first place. Except for the letter. Except for you. They were silent. For a long time. But this silence did not contain the pain she was used to. It was like an old armchair. Creaky, but sturdy. Lucia brought them blankets. The boy fell asleep on their laps, with a book on his stomach. I don't know how long you'll stay, but it seems like you're more than a guest now. And for the first time, Sophia didn't argue, because in that sentence, there was no demand, no obligation. Just, you are here. That was enough. On the third day, everything went wrong. The morning began with sunshine, rare and too warm for such a fragile month. Sophia went out into the yard in her slippers, with a cup of coffee, and smiled for the first time in a long time. Just like that. Matteo was talking to Lucia, calmly, unhurriedly. The boy was busy in the shed, gathering sticks for a castle out of cardboard. There was a strange feeling of silence, as if something was about to happen. Not a stormy silence, more of an inner one. He wants to talk, Lucia said as she left the house. He woke up. He asked about you. Sophia stared at the wall for a long time. Then she got up, put down her cup, and left. The door to the room was ajar. He was lying in the same position, only his face looked older. His eyes were moist, but not from tears, just weakness. He looked straight at her. You came. You wrote. He nodded weakly. I didn't know how to start, and to be honest, I didn't expect you to show up at all. She sat down. Not close. Not far. Like someone who has the strength to be polite, but no desire to be gentle. I don't know why you called us here. I wanted to explain. I know it sounds like a cliché. It's just, there's not much time left. And I feel heavy inside. I thought if anyone should hear that I wasn't completely a monster, it should be you. Sophia looked out the window. Why not him? Matteo? She nodded. Because you're stronger. Me? He coughed. Pause. Then quietly. You endured what I couldn't. I was scared. Back then. When his mother died. When you stayed. I just didn't know what to do. Everything fell apart. And you stayed. You lived. And I just disappeared. Because I didn't know how to live like you. I didn't know how to cope. I thought it was better to leave than to break down in front of a child. She clasped her knees with her hands. You broke down, just far away from us. He closed his eyes. Then he opened them again. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't need it. But I want you to know that I remembered. Always. I just didn't know how to come back. Sophia moved closer. She looked at him. Old. Tired. Cut down by life, like trees in a bad winter. Do you know that he never asked where you were? Only when he was a child. And then he just crossed you out of his life. He said quietly. I don't blame him. And then she saw an envelope on the bedside table. New. Sealed. It had a name written on it. Matteo. The handwriting was shaky. Is this for him? He nodded. He'll read it if he wants to. I won't ask him. Sophia took the envelope, and suddenly everything inside her broke. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Not just his. She opened the bedside table drawer. She didn't know why. Something just made her do it. And there, among the old postcards and pills, was another letter. An old one. Yellowed. Dated almost 10 years ago. The return address was her home. The name of the recipient was Matteo's father. Sophia unfolded the letter and read it. Her own request, written by the hand of a woman who had not yet broken down. If you ever want to be with your son, come. Before he forgets you, before he stops believing. And at the bottom, a postscript. No reply necessary. Just don't forget how he smiles. The letter had not been opened. She sat on the edge of the bed. In one hand, she held the letter he had never read. In the other, she held what he was now trying to convey. Too late, too right, too convenient. And at that moment, Sophia realized that everything she had built, everything she had saved, everything she had lived for, had been built on silence, and she would not be silent anymore. Sophia left the room, clutching two letters. One old, hers, unopened. The other new. Someone else's. Supposedly redemptive. Her chest wasn't just beating. It was pounding. A quiet, elastic rage. Not destructive, but collected. Mature. The kind that comes not in youth, but when you no longer need to shout to tell the truth. In the yard, Matteo was petting the neighbor's dog. Lucia was washing the windows. The boy was building another tower out of sticks. Everything seemed normal. Only Sophia herself was no longer the person she had been that morning. "Did you find my letter?" she asked, approaching her son. "He said he'd give it to me later." Matteo looked up. "Why?" Sophia sat down next to him. "Do you know what I wrote to him when you were little?" He froze. "I wrote. I begged. I told him you were waiting. That you were crying. That you still smiled when you heard the word Dad. I asked him to come back. Not for me. For you. And do you know what he did?" Matteo was silent. "He didn't open it. He didn't even open the envelope. I just found the letter. Mine. Untouched. With the date on it. With your photo inside. He could have forgotten it. Or, number he couldn't have. It was in his nightstand, like a dusty mirror. He kept it. But he didn't read it. He kept it to remind himself that he had a way out. But he didn't use it. Lucia came closer, concerned. "Did something happen?" Sophia handed her the old envelope. "This is my letter. I wrote it 10 years ago. He kept it. As a souvenir. Not as a request. Not as pain. As a reminder that he could come back. But didn't have to." Lucia shook her head. "He always did that. He left himself a way out. And then he pretended there was no way back. He's a good actor. But a bad father." At that moment, Clara came out of the house. "Sophia, be careful. He's sick. Not now. Not like this." "Not now?" "When, Clara? When he disappears again and you all say he was just lost?" "He wasn't lost. He left every time consciously. He made a choice, and every time it wasn't for me, and it wasn't for his son." Clara looked shaken. We didn't know you were writing. Of course you didn't, because you didn't care. You cared about convenience. You wanted everything to be normal. You didn't want any shouting. You didn't want any conflict. I was always the one who held everything together. So I held it together, until I stopped feeling myself. Tomas approached from behind, looking grim. "Sophia, stop. This isn't the time. This is exactly the time, Tomas. This is the first time in many years that I'm not keeping quiet, not swallowing it down. I'm not cleaning up after you. Clara turned to Mateo. You don't think we wanted to hurt you, do you? Mateo looked at her strangely. I think you wanted silence, even if it meant burying my mother's voice. The words hung in the air, heavy as ash. Everyone froze. It was as if an old roof had just collapsed, revealing the sky. Dirty, gloomy, but honest. Sophia approached Clara. Do you know what the worst part is? That you all want to say goodbye properly now, so you won't be ashamed later. And I've lived with that shame all this time. Every time Mateo asked where he was, every time I lied, because the truth was worse than silence. Clara turned away. Tomas clenched his jaw. Lucia wiped her hands on her apron, as if she wanted to wipe away someone else's guilt. Mateo stood up and said quietly, I want to read both letters. Then I'll decide what to do with him. Sophia nodded. Then take them, but don't just read them with your eyes. Read them with your heart. Mine too. Mateo read the letters in his room, for a long time, without comment, without tears. Sophia sat on the porch, her bare feet touching the cool boards, a blanket on her knees, emptiness in her palms. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the neighbor's dog didn't bark as usual. Everything stood still. She didn't know how much time had passed. 15 minutes, an hour, or a lifetime. He came out slowly, without looking up. In his hand were folded sheets of paper. I read it, he said quietly, as if afraid to disturb her breathing. Everything. Sophia didn't ask what he thought, not because she didn't want to know, but because everything inside her had already collapsed. There was only silence. You wanted me to know. Now I do, he continued. He wasn't ready. Neither were you. But at least you tried. She nodded. I can't forgive him. Or myself. Or you. Not yet. Everything is confused. It's as if someone pulled the rug out from under my feet, and now I'm not standing, I'm falling. And I have to fall all the way. Sophia stood up. I'm not waiting for forgiveness. I just wanted you to stop living in a fantasy, and me in guilt. He looked at her wearily. I'm going to him. Not for him. For myself. Go. He disappeared into the house, and with each step he took, Sophia felt herself sinking inside. Everything she had feared, everything she had held on to, had fallen apart. Mateo was no longer her little boy who needed protection. He had grown up, and adults don't need shields, only the truth. She sat down on the grass, her fingers dug into the ground, as if it were the only thing still holding her up. Her head was empty. Not calm. Ringing. As if everything she had built over the years had turned out to be just a shell. Lucia approached her. She held out a cup. It's warm. Do you want some? Sophia shook her head. I don't know what I want. I never have. I've always done what I was supposed to do. What was right. What was quiet. And now, everything has collapsed, even inside. Maybe this is the beginning, Lucia said cautiously. The beginning of what? Of myself. Without guilt, without obligation. Just myself. Sophia smiled. I don't know if I can. Be without pain. Lucia sat down next to her, silently. The dog came over and lay down at their feet. The day grew dim. The birds fell silent. And in that silence, Sophia suddenly realized she was alone. Truly. Not because she had been abandoned, but because she no longer carried anyone on her shoulders. And that was scary. And that was right. It started raining in the evening. Not a thunderstorm, just a dull, stubborn drizzle, as if the sky was washing away the dust of years gone by. Sophia sat alone in the shed, the very same one where she used to hide from her father's shouting as a child. Now it was quiet. So quiet that she could hear the raindrops hitting the tin roof and the old beams creaking in the wind. She held Matteo's old toy in her hands, a soft rabbit with no ears. It lay in a box of junk, as if the world had forgotten that it had once been valuable. Sophia stroked its rag paw and suddenly remembered. Once, when she was a child, Matteo had caught a cold, and she had sat with him all night, pressing the rabbit to his chest. He slept soundly, feverish, crying in his sleep, and she whispered, "I'm with you. Always with you." In the morning, she gathered him up and took him to the garden, squeezing in time between work, chores, and reproaches. And no one told her, "Good job." No one hugged her. She was her own praise and punishment. Now, sitting in this old shed, she allowed herself for the first time to remember not only the events, but also the feelings. Not the ones that had been suppressed, but the ones that had been hidden. I wasn't just strong, she thought. I was alone. And I didn't even cry. The memory of her mother came to mind, tired, dry, perpetually dissatisfied. A woman must endure, she used to say. The main thing is for the family to stay together. And then she left quietly, without saying goodbye. And Sophia was left behind. Again. With Matteo. With debts. With silence. Maybe I really was always too soft, she thought. But there was no bitterness in that question anymore. There was understanding. Deep, like old water in a well. Softness is not weakness. It's when you don't push back, even when you're being beaten. It's when you stay, even when no one calls you. She remembered her father's voice. Not sharp, but even. Prickly. Do you think you can save someone with kindness? The world doesn't change with pity. She didn't answer then, but now she would have said, "No, but kindness at least makes the pain less sticky." The drops on the roof grew thicker. A dog barked somewhere behind the wall. Someone walked across the gravel. But Sophia didn't go out. She stayed in that small space, for the first time not because she was hiding, but because it was safe there. She looked inside herself. She didn't blame herself. She didn't try to fix anything. She just acknowledged it. I'm tired. I'm angry. I was alone. It's not my fault. I did everything I could. I'm not a mistake. And with that last thought, she exhaled. And the rain, as if in response, grew quieter. Almost gentle. The morning was clear, so clear that she didn't even want coffee, just to breathe. Sophia came out of the shed with her back straight, without fuss, without her usual glance around. She was wearing the same gray sweater, slightly stretched at the elbows, but now it didn't seem like armor. Just clothes, just a woman, just alive. The kitchen smelled of bread. Lucia was kneading dough, humming an old tune under her breath, forever unfinished, like most of the conversations in this family. When she saw Sophia, she didn't ask any questions. "Matteo is there," she said simply. "In the garden. Sitting, thinking." Sophia nodded. She already knew she would go to him, but not to decide anything. To share the silence, for the first time not as a burden, but as a bridge. Matteo sat on a bench, staring at the ground. He held 2 letters in his hands. She approached slowly, sat down next to him. Neither of them spoke right away. They just sat there. "I thought about it all night," he said. "I wanted to figure out the right thing to do, how to make it easier for everyone. Then I realized there is no everyone. There is only you, and even then, only if you're lucky." Sophia listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to help. She just sat there. "He's leaving," Matteo continued, slowly. "But he's leaving. And you know, I don't want him to leave as a victim. Not because he doesn't deserve it, but because then I'll be left as the executioner." Sophia nodded slightly. Her eyes didn't flicker. "I'll thank him for writing, not for leaving, not for coming back, just for trying." He handed her the letters. "And these, I'll burn these. Not because I want to forget, because I remember. And remembering is my right, not his." Sophia took the letters. She pressed them to her chest. "Then go. Say what you want. No rules." "And you?" She smiled. "I'll talk to Clara, to Thomas, to the others. Not so they'll understand, but so I won't wait for them to understand anymore." Matteo stood up. He looked older. Not his face, his back. Straight, tired, but no longer bent. Sophia watched him go, and for the first time in many years, she wasn't afraid that he would leave. She went to the barn, to where it all began. They were already waiting there, not with anger, not with apologies, with the same expression on their faces that relatives have when they hope that everything will work out on its own. But she entered, no longer as a convenient woman, but as a woman with her own story. "I have no complaints against you," she said. "I have no more questions for you. But I have words. My own." Clara reached out to say something, but Sophia raised her hand. "For 10 years, I was your support. Not because you asked me to be, but because I was afraid that without me, you would fall apart. It turns out you lived perfectly well without me, and I didn't live at all." Thomas lowered his eyes. Hugo muttered something. Raphael stood up as if he wanted to leave, but stayed. "I'm not coming back. Not the way you want me to. Not by your rules. Not in a role where Sophia will manage. I'm managing. But now, I'm on my own. Without you." Silence, but not oppressive. Just the air had changed. She left first. Lucia was standing by the door. She silently handed her a mug of coffee. "You really are lighter today. I can feel it." Sophia nodded. "Because I finally let go. Not of them, of myself. The old man died in the morning. No noise, no last words, no drama. He just left, like he lived, on tiptoes, without asking if anyone was ready to forgive him. Lucia found him first. She closed her eyes, sat down next to him and just sat there. Then she went to wake the others. No fuss, no sobs, just a simple phrase. "It's over. He's gone." Sophia heard this and didn't go right away. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching that same rag toy in her fingers. Outside the window, a new day was beginning, and no matter what happened, it was still beginning. And it no longer depended on the past. Matteo was the first to come out into the hallway. He was grown up and silent. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He just nodded to his mother. "I told him everything. Everything." Sophia stood up and approached him. "What did you say?" "That I don't forgive him, but I don't hate him either. That I'll live my life my way, without his guilt, and without yours." Those words were like a crowbar to a wall, liberating, precise, necessary. An hour later, those who were supposed to arrive arrived. Those who didn't want to stay left. Tomas tried to be organized, as always. Clara was quiet. Raphael was helpful. But no one asked Sophia how she was. And that was right, because she no longer needed their approval. She was. They gathered again in the barn, but not to discuss, but to say goodbye. Sophia looked at the face of the deceased, dry, limp, no longer scary, no longer important, just a face. "You know," she said quietly, "you were a bad father. And no letter will fix that. But you gave me strength, even if you didn't mean to, because everything I was afraid of has already happened. And I survived." Lucia stood nearby. Death doesn't fix things, it just draws a line. Sophia nodded. And I'm not afraid of lines anymore. She walked over to the door where Mateo was standing. "Everything?" "Everything," she replied. "Home?" She looked at him. "No, not home. Somewhere I can start living. Not dragging on, not saving, just living." He took her by the hand. Silently. They left first. No hard feelings. No loud promises. They just left, like people who had said everything they needed to say, and who didn't need anything else. She stood at the stove again. But the kitchen was different. Cleaner. Brighter. Not her old corner with peeling walls and creaky floors, but a small, quiet dwelling with flowered curtains, the smell of freshly baked bread, and windows that no longer looked out on autumn. Now, they looked out on peace. Sophia stirred the soup. The same movements, the same hands, but they were no longer the same. They didn't tremble. They didn't rush. They didn't seek confirmation of someone else's need for them. They just did. There was a photograph on the table, the very same one. Little Mateo, smiling, and next to it, a new one. Him, grown up against the backdrop of a tree, not smiling, but looking honestly into the camera, deeply, the way only someone who has been through a lot can look. And he wasn't hiding. She rearranged the photo in the frame. She put a match under the leg so it wouldn't wobble, and she exhaled, slowly, without regret. Children were playing outside the window. The neighbors, not hers. But their laughter didn't annoy her. It was just there, like background noise, like proof that life goes on, even if you're not holding it together. Sophia walked over to the table and sat down. In her hands was the same mug, glued together where it had cracked. It was still leaking, but now she didn't care. If you've ever felt like you're only in your family out of habit, write the word enough in the comments. Your story is important too, and maybe it will be the next one.